like to welcome you to Faith Reformed Baptist Church. And I apologize for the heat that's in this building, but hey, once upon a time we didn't have air conditioning. That's just the way it was. So endure like the saints of old. We have been preaching through the book of Romans now for some time. I believe I'm in the maybe the late 60s. That's how many sermons we've had so far. I think maybe we've had 70 sermons on the book of Romans so far, and we're just in the latter part of Romans chapter 9. We don't preach in Romans chapter 9 every week in this church, Many times it seems like it. But in this particular passage, I would like to concentrate on one phrase, believe it or not. Yes, just one phrase today. Romans chapter 9, verse number 23. So in the scripture reading today, this is in the latter part of that. And that he might make known the riches of his glory on the vessels of mercy, which he hath afore prepared unto glory. And the phrase I want to bring out today is the riches of his glory. Many times this phrase is overlooked in many passages of Scripture, especially in this chapter. This chapter seems to be pulled out of the Bible so many times when arguments are at foot. Or many people want to argue about this, and the only thing they want to say is just one type of argument. No one ever looks at the rest of the beauty that's in this chapter. And today especially, when I say today, I'm talking about, these days. It seems like within the last 40, 50 years, people have been concentrating on the glory of his riches instead of the riches of his glory. And if you can think a few minutes about that, there is within our knowledge of God that he owns all things. He owns the cattle of 1,000 hills, and so the world has this tendency to say, maybe he'll give me one. Or he owns all things. And so maybe if we're Christians, he does not want the children of the king to be paupers, and so maybe we can become princes. Many times, gospel preachers has a temptation to tempt the flesh of men to say, perhaps they'll come and hear the gospel if we say God can pay your bills, and God can heal you, and God can make your life easier, and God can solve your problems. Well, the world wants to hear that. But you see, that's the same thing that's being presented by every other false religion. Not that this is the false. I didn't mean to apply that, of course. But people want to use God like he was a genie to rub him out of a lamp and ask him for some of his riches. Ask him for a wish. To say, if you'll only do this for me, well, then I'll serve you. And that's what happens when you concentrate on the glory of his riches, and then you hold out the fact that the Almighty owns all things and he wants his people to prosper. And truly, God's people are going to prosper. But if you just listened to the Sunday school lesson, your life consists in more in the things that you possess. Your life is made rich by his glory. And that is the full message that I'm going to say today. So if you got that, you know where I'm going. So I would like to give you a brief review of where we were last week, so you're not just kind of hanging in the middle of a passage here. We talked last week about how a man would have the gall or the nerve to accuse God of being unjust. And of course, Paul rebukes him. He says, who do you think you are that talks against God? That's my translation. Who art thou, O man, that repliest against God? And so the message last week was this: approach God humbly. Because it's okay to ask questions, but it's not okay in your pride to walk up to the face of God and poke your finger in his face and accuse him or say, give an account. Because we can ask and God will respond. You ask and it will be given. But the attitude, the humility of heart. Remember how we talked when Moses was told to take off his shoes, when Joshua was confronting the warrior on the battlefield. He said, take off your shoes. When Job was addressed by God, he said he repented in ashes and sackcloth. And when Isaiah was purged by a coal from the altar, the way we should be purged by the knowledge of how God saved us, by his own blood, by imputing righteousness to us, we must approach God humbly, and then he will give us the answers. Because a humble heart asks properly, with the head bowed, the knee bent. And with that, God will provide. God will provide you an answer. So, now that we've learned how to approach God, let's go on and see how Paul says, and I'm going to paraphrase here, that he has made vessels of wrath. But remember that they were made, they were not created. He said of the same lump, God did not create sinners. Man sinned. That's on us. We shoulder that. But mercy is on God. He did that and formed out of the clay of fallen man and raised up even vessels of wrath like Pharaoh. And why? Remember what he said? So that his name might be spread throughout all the earth. And that is the essence of what it's like to make the holiness of God known. That's called glory. To have the apparent and visible, your ability to see God's greatness. And remember, take all his attributes, his greatness, his knowledge, his ever-presence, his immutability, he just doesn't change, and put the word holy in front of each one of them. Because that's the way he is. Just and righteous and holy in his omnipotence. Now, when God makes that known, that's called glory. When it's visible to the eye, it's glory. Now, when you can see the beauty of God in his hand in dealing with this, then you have been given the same gift that God gave to Moses when he pleaded, "O Lord, show me thy glory." And God said, "I will cause my goodness to pass before your eyes." Now that is what's not seen today. People do not see the hand of God in the world. All they see is sin, and then they want to turn to God with an accusing finger. But I'm telling you, there is a richness of seeing his glory. And beware of the gospel that says, see the glory of his riches instead, because that appeals to the flesh of men. And let me tell you, there's a big problem in this world where the gospel is now appealing to the flesh of men instead of to the glory of God and showing the world just who God is. But instead they appeal and say, are you poor? You can become rich. Sow a little seed. Give a little money and God will give to you. If you don't feel well, come and if you aren't healed, then it's your fault because it's all your faith. And you have created a religion of man. What we need is a vision of his glory. The ability to see. Now I'm going to define these two things. There's two things we need to know what the words mean. Number one, riches. And number two, glory. Because when it comes to understanding what the word riches is all about, well, one man's, how's the phrase go? One man's poison is another man's, I don't know, it's what he likes, okay? Everyone's appetite's different, right? People will look at something and say, I wouldn't give a dime for that, but I'll give something for that. So that's how people get rich on eBay. They sell their junk to people that think it's riches. And so the idea of what a rich is and what glory is, the world thinks that there are some things that are glorious. I'm going to tell you a story, and it's going to be embarrassing to me and my wife. So forgive me, Glenda. Okay? I can remember a couple of years ago where I walked into Walmart with my wife and with my son Andrew. And we picked up a bag of one of our favorite treats, a bag of M&Ms. And we take it up to the counter and we pay for it. And my wife said, oh, no, the sale sign said it's this much. And so the clerk said, oh, we have a policy. If the price is wrong, we give it to you. Well, Glenda and I did this little happy dance. Oh, boy, we saved, $2.50. And Andrew pointed out very rightly, says, it doesn't take much to make you two really happy. And so you can see that some people, the riches are, is this what's going to make your whole world bright and shiny? Is this going to be the thing that is going to make your life worth living? Well, that's what the riches are. Didn't the Lord say, your treasure is where your heart is? And so when it comes to riches, the carnal man is not going to think of the same thing that the spiritual man is going to think of. When the man who is carnally and of the world, and when he has the idea of what is valuable, what is beautiful, what is the riches of this world, he's not immediately going to think of the glory of God. He's going to think of what makes my life fulfilling and easy, and the eating higher on the hog, getting off of those shanks. I want some ham. I don't want the hocks. I want to live the way I see these other people live. I want to drive the way these other people drive. I want to have air conditioning. I want to have all these things that people, the world thinks of these riches. Now, are those things wrong to want? Well, I'll put it this way. The Lord knows we have need of them. But seek ye first the kingdom of God. The things that you need will be added. Do not make them the goal of your life. And so the riches, when people think of riches, do not allow other people to entice you with the riches of the world just because you have those needs. There are other riches that is much, much better. Do not be enticed. The definition of the word rich is different for the carnal man than it is for the spiritual man. So do not be confused when you're in a discussion with a family member or a friend or someone else, or in the quiet time with yourself. If you debate in your own mind, if you do that, I do that all the time, And my wife says, what are you saying? I'm actually talking to myself. She bothers me with that all the time. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to me. And so you understand that when you start using these words, be aware that the world thinks different than the Christian. Now, the idea of glory. The world loves glory. They do. They want their name up in lights. They want to be seen. They want all of their achievements to be highlighted. They want their names up in the big print. They want to be recognized. They know what glory is. And the question is, just what do they think of when they seek glory? All of a sudden, the spotlight is there's a tug of war between men and God. And who should have the spotlight of glory? When a man can truly, from his heart, say, may every spotlight be on Christ. May every spotlight accent the works of God. And may we see him who he is, for who he is. Then, and only then, will you understand the phrase, the riches of his glory, and not just the glory of his riches. This is not a religion where you come hoping to get something out of it. That you can come and rub that lamp. God comes and rubs our hearts like a lamp, and you know what comes out of it? Sin. So now that we know the terms, now that we understand that there is a glory that's defined by the world differently than the glory that's defined by the Scriptures of God. And let me just briefly tell you what the glory of God is in the Scriptures. And that's when there is an open display, an open, easily seen display of all of God's attributes. I'm going to say especially of his holiness. When Isaiah, remember we had that last week, when Isaiah was told, and he heard the angels, he says, and the angel said, holy, holy, holy. And you would expect that the next phrase would be, the whole earth is filled with his holiness. That's not what it says. The whole earth is filled with his glory. The display of his holiness. But the world does not see it. But do you think that it's not there? Do you think that the angels are lying to him? Do you think that it's not there now? If the eye of man would look, would they see his glory? Would they see his hand? They do not. They do not, because children can run through a museum and right by all the beautiful paintings, and I'll say, there's nothing to see here. And yet they're surrounded by beauty, surrounded by architecture, by paintings, by sculptures, and children that only want to have fun saying, there's a playground outside, there's some really good things to see. It's beautiful. And they'll run right by it. And the world cannot see the glory of God. They cannot, because they choose not to. They have a bad taste bud for it. They do not have the heart that hungers, that's able to say, that is good. Instead, they spit it out and say, isn't there anything else? It's not that it's not there. It's just they don't like it, and they will not see it. There's a difference between these words, will and can. Once upon a time, parents used to correct their children when the children say, can I go outside? And the mother would say, I don't know, can you? Are your legs working? You know, that little rebuke. And of course, it's meant to say, you want to ask, may I go outside? You're asking permission, not ability. But when it comes to this heart and the ability to do what is good, we, as preachers of the word, many times we say, man does not have that ability. The idea of ability there has to do with the desire to do it. And there's always that one response. Well, if I would if I wanted to. I got that power. Okay, please want to. Prove it. Do it. See the glory of God. Look into the world. Read your newspaper. Watch Fox News or whatever you watch. Whatever it is, see the hand of God in all that's happening in this world. And I want you to. And say, I'm going to choose to see it. Let me see. Let me see if your heart will do it. Because if you cannot, then I'd say, you're stuck with the world's definition of riches and glory, and you have no other choice but to have that interchangeable phrase. The glory of his riches is the same as the riches of his glory, because that's the way the flesh is always going to see it. Now, let's take a look at what the world will do what the world will do. I have about a few points here. When it comes to the world's view of seeing everything in general, John Steinbeck used this phrase that people used to use all the time called the big shebang. Okay? I guess it's a word that is not known to everyone, but it just means the idea of everything. When it comes to looking at the whole world and how it hangs together, men have a way of not resting in what God says. They would rather rest in the opinions of the best scientists, of the best politicians, of the best authorities, credentialed people, credible sources. But when they pick up a Bible and they'll say, well, God says this, they would say, yes, but what does so-and-so say? They will not rest in what God says. They would rather rest in anything else. Notice what I said. They would rest in anything else. They would rest in the words of a Popeye cartoon before they would rest on what God says. When it comes to satisfaction, how many people are satisfied in their lives? This whole world. You know, I'm a child of the 60s, the Rolling Stones. I can't get no satisfaction, right? How many, the young people don't know rock and roll. Thank you for not, but I'm not going to trade for what you have either. But when it comes to the world being satisfied, do you think the world is going to be satisfied with God? They're not. They're not satisfied with God. There is, in the nature of a man, the ability. See, I want to talk about ability again. The ability, when I say the word ability, you have to get the idea that he has the desire to do it and the desire to believe it. There is within man, fallen man, the ability to believe that his enemy whenever he does, when I say enemy, people you don't like, no matter what they do, there is that unique ability to assign a wicked motive behind it. They'll say, I see somebody parking their car there. He's probably trying to cheat someone. I see someone walking up. It could be innocent behavior, and yet they want to assign wicked motives behind it. Now, when it comes to God, when it comes to all that he's done, the creation of the world, how he is sovereign over all things, how there are many things in this world that seems to go unjudged. Many people suffer from injustice, and yet they are not satisfied with whatever God does. They'll say, well, why doesn't he stop that? Why doesn't he judge that? Why doesn't he do that? But whenever there is a judgment, they say, well, he's kind of harsh, isn't he? Why does he do that? No matter what he does, the world has the ability to assign a bad motive to it. And that's what sinners have the ability to do. The sinners have this unique strength to see and to fill in all the empty gaps with evil motive. And they always do that with God. They're not at rest with God. They are unsatisfied with God. They would rather find their rest and satisfaction with meeting the needs of their flesh and resting in their own strength. And the next thing I want to talk about is beauty. We looked at rest, we looked at satisfaction, now I want to look at beauty. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I think that's pretty true. And so when you look at what a sinner thinks is beautiful, I'm not going to say that everything they say is wrong. I've seen the works of sinners. Some of them, we're all sinners. What other work can I look at? Everyone. The best poetry in the world, written by sinners. The best novels in the world, written by sinners. The best painting in the world, written by sinners. Painted by sinners. Everything about it. But when a man is changed by the Spirit of God, there is incorporated into it a beauty that the world cannot see. But the world knows what it likes. Some people don't have to be trained in how to be a connoisseur of art or a connoisseur of literature or a connoisseur of good food or anything else. It kind of works like this. I know what I like. The world knows what it likes, and it has its definition of what is beautiful. But I can tell you this. The world thinks beauty, even though sometimes is truly beautiful, has that unique ability to take what is hideous in the sight of God and embrace it and say, this is really nice. Greed, amorous, sexual debauchery, all these things. Many times, blatant thievery can be assigned to, that's an ambitious man. He has a lot of drive. He has all these positive words can be spun to show that all is fair in love and war. These phrases tend to reveal the way a man can say what is wrong is right and what is right is wrong. And men have that ability to do that. Oh, if we had that inability. If we only had the inability to do wrong. There's another area in which men do not see the glory of God in this world and do not appreciate the riches of His glory. And that's when it comes to their health and their wealth and their status, because this is something that cannot be cashed on a paycheck, cannot be traded and sold on a market, can't be given away or anything like that. But your health usually is something that God gives or something that God takes away. The same is true many times for wealth. Sometimes people say, well, hard work is what it is. That's true. But you know what? Sometimes God just gives it to people. How many here, did you fill out that application before you were born to be raised by rich people? Remember? Did you forget to check that little box that says, born to a rich parent? Okay? And born in this country during this year. Or, I forgot and I got the Middle Ages by a plague, by serfs in Europe. I'd lost out when I tried to become what I felt I was able to do. Folks, Some people like to blame God for their circumstances. But let me tell you something about circumstances. There is grace given for you to see the hand of God and His glory, and having the power of faith in His promises to live through those things is living under the glory of God. What is more glorious to His name? Can you think of the time when God was bragging about His servant Job? Remember that? And He was well pleased to take everything he had, that He might live to His glory. This is our opportunity. All these things. The glory, many times, can be exhibited in the way we approach God. We have a real problem in this world, and that is religion has a way of wanting to be successful. And many times we will change this phrase around to appeal to the flesh of men. And it's like what I said before, but I happen to have it here in my notes, so I'm going to say it again. It happens to do with the way the gospel is presented to those who need Christ. And instead of saying, I can't tell them to look at the glory of God because they can't see it, so let me just say that God can help you with your health problems. God can help you with your poverty problems. And then they say, start looking at the glory of His riches instead of the riches of His glory. Now let me tell you right now, there's nothing wrong with the glory of His riches. Nothing wrong with that. He owns everything. He is tremendously powerful. All of it is good. It all belongs to Him. And He can dispense it any way He wishes. It's a tremendous glory. He is rich and He is generous. But don't give that away for a second. Exchange it for the riches of His glory, because that is what's going to get you right through to the end. The riches of His glory. Now, when it comes to the riches of His glory, it is the spiritual man that will rest in Christ, and he will rest in God. When you are confused about whether you're doing one or the other, whether you are celebrating your heart in the presence of God in the riches of His glory or the glory of His riches, just think how this relates you to God, who He is, and to God, what He does. Who He is and what He does. If you rest in the God of the Scriptures, you're on the right track. If you rest in what God has done, you're on the right track. But instead, if you cannot find your rest and peace in seeing what God has done, then you are more than likely looking for the glory of riches instead of the riches of His glory. If you are not satisfied with anything He does, I pray and I do this and I'm looking around, and you just can't find that satisfaction. You just can't see the beauty of God. You can't see why God is so enthralled unless He's going to give you something, unless you can profit by it, unless your barns get bigger, unless you get healthier, unless something happens to your benefit, unless when you balance your books, everything is balanced out, or you get a profit. Then all of a sudden you don't see, what does it profit me to be a Christian? What does it profit me to go to church? What does it profit me to raise my children according in the fear and admonition of God? Well, if what you see in your rest and in your satisfaction in life and what you perceive to be beautiful is something more than just getting profit. It is, in the heart sense, beauty is virtue. Virtue, holiness, justice, righteousness. Now, I have not even mentioned compassion and mercy and grace, have I? Not yet. But you see, Paul is saying that that is God. What if God endured the vessels of wrath, that He might show the riches of His glory upon the vessels of mercy? Do you see? A lot of times people will do this. They will say, God is not doing His job. We have so much sin in the world. Where is justice? That's not the right question. You see, I used to play a game when I was younger, when I was a debater, when I thought winning a debate was more important than finding the truth. It was just more fun to win than to find truth. You know, when I was a younger guy. I'd rather lose than find truth now that I'm older. But when it comes to that, I used to play this game, what if? When my opponent that I'm debating would come up with an idea, I would come up with about 4 or 5 or 6 what ifs. Crazy scenarios to prove he's wrong. What if this? What if a guy was on a desert island with only a Coke, you know? And I would create all these, you know, crazy scenarios. Well, Paul, there's a good way to do it and a bad way to do it. You see, I was always doing it the bad way. The good way to do it is to always bring in what if, knowing that the what if is true. Paul says this in verse number 22. What if God, willing to show his wrath? Now, what did I say the glory of God was? The open display of the greatness of his attributes. Now, what if, I'll read it this way. What if God, willing to show his justice? Because wrath against sin is justice. What if God, now this word willing, a lot of times we like to use that phrase, the will of God. This word really means like the desire of God. The idea that God is pleased to do this. What if God is pleased to show his wrath, to make his power known, is willing to endure? That's the idea. God is willing to endure. We seem to think as sinners, we're the only ones that put up with anything. We have to endure it all. We never think of what God endures. We seem to think when people sin against us, well, I have to put up with this. You know, sinner sinning against sinners. A lot of times, they deserve it, both ways. And if a sinner should happen to be sinned against and he's innocent, well, there's plenty of things that he's still guilty of. I'll put it this way. There's only one who has to endure with sin, and that's God. He's the only good. He's the only holy. He's the only one that can truly say, I'm going to endure this. Now, why in the world would God endure sinners? Now, remember, the scripture says, he endured the vessels of wrath. Now, he calls us vessels because he has made us to hold certain things. He has vessels of mercy. They hold mercy. He has vessels of wrath. They hold wrath. They're both of the same lump, and they're made that way, not created that way. But the idea behind it is that he is willing to endure. He's willing to be slandered. He is willing to be called a liar. He is willing to be hated. He is willing to give his own son and let them kill him. He is willing to wait and to be long-suffering. God, you know, we always want to turn the tables on God. But no matter what he does, we have a good excuse why we don't like him. That's the world's view. That's why they do not see his glory. That is the blindness of the world. If you cannot see the beauty of God, you need to recognize that natural bias and see what God is enduring for you, not what you are enduring for God. God is willing to endure this sinful world. He's willing to put up with it. Willing to do what many of us never has wanted to do at all. He's willing to put up with this. Now, the display of God's glory must be seen by his people, or else they will faint. You will faint if you have no strength. As I get older, I get worn out a lot faster. I do. I used to be a young man, just like a lot of you used to be young men. And all you young people, you got the vim and the vigor and nothing wears you out, you know. And yet, as you get older, you start to think a little bit about, maybe I should be smarter and not stronger. Maybe I should fix things with my head instead of with my back. Maybe I should do the heavy lifting with my mind, you know. And so when it comes to seeing what the power a Christian needs, you need to take your eyes off of what the world values, such as the health and the wealth and the riches and the power and the status. That is the glory of riches rather than the riches of his glory, which is the beauty of God. Did not God say to Abraham, I am thy great and exceeding reward? He is the beauty. And if you fail to see it, I warn you, you're not going to be strong enough to make it. You'll want to make it. You'll want to be a good Christian. You'll want to serve God with all your heart and strength. But if you cannot see his beauty, you can't not do this in your flesh. You cannot do it with your ability to be smart or strong or anything else. You must have the grace of seeing his hand, of seeing the greatness and appreciating and knowing that it is not by the will of man, but by the will of God that these things come. That we with the prophets will say, it's marvelous in our eyes. Marvelous to behold, the hand of God everywhere working on our behalf, and that the Almighty is for us and not against us, that he will make his goodness to pass before us. And I see it with my heart and with my eyes. And everywhere in the world, with the politics, with the wars, with the famines, with the earthquakes, all these things are under that mighty hand of God. And he is holy and he is just. And he doesn't bring his justice upon the world because he's long-suffering to the vessels of mercy. And he's willing to be endured. He's willing to endure the false accusations of all the world for our sakes, for the sake of his own Son and all those who are in his Son. He's long-suffering, going to be compassionate. His mercy, he will have mercy. That not means, oh, you can have it if you want it. No. God is going to accomplish this. It's like a woman having travail. He will be satisfied with his work and have all that God gives him. It will be accomplished, and God will save every single soul, and he'll not lose one. Not lose one. The almighty hand of God can be seen for the eye that trusts him and believes him and approaches him in humility. But I'm warning you, God resists the proud. So, seek to see the beauty and the riches and the wealth of his glory. Not the other way around. God will give you what you need, but what you really need is to see him, to see the beauty of his glory, the kindness, his long-suffering. So I submit that to you for the glory of God. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Holy Father.